The German V-1 flying rocket, a terrifying new weapon of war packed with 1,870 pounds of explosives, buzzed ominously over the city of Birmingham, England, leaving a trail of dread in its wake. Its pulsing engine cut out suddenly, and the rocket plummeted from the sky, detonating violently upon impact. The explosion shattered windows, leveled buildings, and claimed the lives of unsuspecting British civilians. Corporal Lena Derriecott, an African-American soldier serving with the U.S. Army's 6,888th Central Postal Battalion, the only all-black, all-female Women's Army Corps, WAC unit deployed overseas during World War II, heard the blast, yet she had no time to dwell on the destruction. Her focus remained on the vital work at hand, clearing a massive backlog of mail for thousands of American troops serving across continental Europe. Those were frightening times, Derriecott would later recall, underscoring the constant threat that hung over her and her fellow soldiers. Despite the perilous circumstances, Derriecott understood the profound importance of her role. She knew that for the men on the front lines, a letter from home or a parcel from a friend or family member was more than just correspondence. It was a lifeline to the world they had left behind. One thing people in the service looked forward to was mail, knowing somebody was still thinking about them, she explained. In the military, mail calls when soldiers gathered around the designated mail carrier as names were called for letters and packages was a highly anticipated event, a moment that provided connection, comfort, and a sense of normalcy amid the chaos of war. Lena Derriecott's journey to this pivotal moment began years earlier. At just 17, she was a student at Germantown High School, located north of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, when the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor rocked the nation. The only child of divorced parents, she lived with her mother and her aunt. Her mother worked as a synagogue caterer, while her aunt ran her own kosher catering business. From humble beginnings as a farm girl in Georgia, Derriecott's mother had learned to grow vegetables efficiently, and she even obtained permission from the state to cultivate an abandoned golf course, producing enough food to feed much of the local neighborhood. She was strong, Derriecott remembered, a testament to the resilience and determination she inherited from her mother. Even as a teenager, Derriecott was actively engaged in civic causes, both locally and nationally. She avidly read books and kept abreast of global developments, closely following the rise of Nazism in Germany through newspapers and radio broadcasts. She joined a radio show fan club called Grace Granger and her Nacky Sackies, which aired from the Pearl Theater in Center City, Philadelphia. On a broader scale, she became involved with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt's National Youth Administration, participating in protests against segregated restaurants in Washington, D.C. "We didn't think they should be segregated," she recalled, noting that the persistence of their efforts led many establishments to desegregate. Before the war, Derriecott had formed a friendship with a Jewish boy named Abram Hyman David, whose family owned a delicatessen on Earlham Terrace in her neighborhood. David enlisted in the Army Air Forces and was tragically killed on his first combat mission. Derriecott, who was already working at a local hospital at the time, felt deeply inspired by his sacrifice. His death became a driving force behind her own decision to join the Army Air Forces. With men being drafted, Derriecott volunteered in the summer of 1943 and applied for nursing, beginning her military journey at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. Originally established to train white female officers, the fort had opened a segregated section for black women, and by the time Derriecott arrived, it was also training enlisted women as part of the WAC. Here she learned the rigors of military life, how to dress, march, and conduct herself as a soldier. She bivouacked with fellow recruits, built campfires, and studied military procedures in meticulous detail. "We had to keep our shoes shined and our bunk beds made tight enough to bounce a quarter on," she recalled, a vivid memory that captured both the discipline and precision demanded of women serving in uniform during World War II. In every challenge, from the perilous V-1 rocket attacks in Birmingham to the disciplined training at Fort Des Moines, Lena Derriecott's story reflects courage, resilience, and dedication, offering a remarkable window into the experiences of the 6,888th Central Postal Battalion and the crucial role of women in sustaining the morale of American troops during the war. The women of the 6,888th Central Postal Battalion were issued the standard khaki summer and wool winter uniforms, colloquially known as the pink and greens. Military regulations dictated strict grooming standards, and since hair could not touch the collar, the women were required either to cut it short or pin it neatly up. Derriecott, like all the other enlistees, quickly learned the importance of maintaining both their uniforms and barracks to the highest standard. If the cadre came marching through and spotted something wrong, they would penalize you, she explained. It kept you on the ball. The discipline of army life was rigorous, and while the strictness was challenging, Derriecott often remembered the biting cold as one of the most difficult aspects of her training. She recalled standing guard duty in whipping winds and snow, shivering almost to the point of freezing, and yet fulfilling her responsibilities with unwavering dedication. Once her initial training concluded, Derriecott was sent to Douglas Army Airfield in southern Arizona, a key training base for Martin B-26 Marauder pilots and their crews. Upon arrival in January 1944, she was administered an aptitude test, but she was hindered by a cold, sneezing and coughing through much of the assessment and breaking her concentration. "I was never able to take the test again," she lamented. Despite this setback, Derriecott found camaraderie at the base, forming a close friendship with fellow WAC Emma Philpott, whose singing talent shone at every talent show. Derriecott herself enjoyed singing but admitted she was too shy to perform, often content to support her friends' performances. During her time at Douglas, Derriecott served primarily as a nurse at the base hospital, attending to airmen, crew members, and their families. She never treated combat casualties, as the hospital's scope focused on routine care, yet her contribution was crucial. In addition to her nursing duties, she was promoted to corporal and assigned to the motor pool, where she meticulously tracked B-25 bomber fuel usage and reported weekly consumption by student pilots. When not working, she and her fellow WACs participated in weekly bomber pilot graduations, marching with precision and discipline. The base also offered entertainment, with performances by renowned singers such as Lena Horne and Arthur Prysock, which brought brief relief from the rigors of military life. Not all challenges were professional. Derriecott and her fellow WACs faced the harsh reality of segregation in military life. One night, she accompanied 3 black female officers, including Lieutenant Clark, the chief WAC, to the base theater. They were informed by a military policeman that they were not allowed to sit in the officers' section because of their race. Lieutenant Clark, enraged by the insult, demanded to speak with Colonel Brandel, insisting that her unit be treated with respect. Her firm stand prompted the colonel to order an end to segregation in the theater, bowling alley, and cafeteria, setting a precedent that would ripple across the base. Within a year, African American pilot candidates arrived from Fort Huachuca, Arizona, to train on B-25s, highlighting the lasting impact of Clark's courageous stand. Amid the challenges and triumphs, Derriecott's personal life flourished. She met an African American drill sergeant named Hugh Thaddeus Bell in the post-exchange. Bell, in addition to his duties as a drill sergeant, led the bass band and served as the bugler, announcing reveille at sunrise and taps at sunset. Their friendship quickly blossomed into romance, and the pair became well known across the base. 6 months after they met, Bell proposed, and Derriecott fondly recalled, "It was quite a wedding." Through rigorous discipline, brave advocacy, and personal resilience, Lena Derriecott not only contributed to the war effort but also forged a life and legacy that exemplified the courage and determination of the women of the 6,888th Central Postal Battalion. After nearly a year of training and service at Douglas Army Airfield, Lena Derriecott volunteered for overseas duty, motivated by the urgent need to deliver mail to American troops in Europe. During this period, the backlog of undelivered letters had grown so severe that the Army decided the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, an all-African American women's unit, would take on the monumental task. Selection for this mission was highly competitive, as the Army sought women with exceptional temperament, character, and resilience. Once chosen, Derriecott and her fellow candidates underwent 8 weeks of grueling preparation. Their training included marching long distances, donning gas masks in tear gas-filled rooms, scaling rope ladders, and practicing abandoned ship drills to prepare them for any contingency at sea. About a month after completing this intense regimen, Derriecott received the call to deploy. "Of course, I didn't know that we were going to be called overseas that soon," she recalled, reflecting on the suddenness of the assignment. Before leaving, Derriecott bid farewell to her husband, who was deeply supportive. "He knew that when we got married he or I would go where we were told," she said. She and the other WACs traveled to New York Harbor and boarded the French luxury liner SS Isle de France, setting sail for Europe in late January 1945. Their journey took them to Glasgow, Scotland, where they arrived on February 12, before continuing to Birmingham, England, 2 days later. There, the women officially became part of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion on March 12. Although the Allies had turned the tide of the war and D-Day had come and gone 8 months prior, England was still under threat. German V-1 and V-2 rockets continued to strike the island nation, and the WAC's intended barracks had been destroyed by a V-1 just a day before their arrival. Left without suitable housing, the women took up residence in an old schoolhouse, the former King Edward's Boys' School, which was the only facility large enough to accommodate all of them. "It was the only place large enough to house all of us," Derriecott explained. Their mission was daunting. Warehouses filled with years of undelivered mail, often stacked to the ceilings, awaited them. Many of the packages had broken open, and rats had feasted on Christmas food parcels and letters alike. The women had to start from scratch under the supervision of a cadre of officers, and Derriecott soon met Major Charity Adams, the first African-American woman to earn an officer's rank in the U.S. Army and the commanding officer of the battalion. Derriecott was immediately impressed. Adams faced challenges unique to her status as a black female officer, often receiving less respect than her position warranted, yet she led with distinction. The 6,888th was composed of approximately 850 officers and enlisted personnel, divided into 4 companies, A, B, C, and D, alongside a headquarters company responsible for administrative and support duties. Each company operated in 3 shifts, working 8-hour rotations around the clock, including weekends. Unlike other units, the 6,888th had no white officers, making it unique in the European theater of operations. They were given only 6 months to complete a task that had previously seemed insurmountable. Life in the warehouses was harsh. The buildings were damp, rat-infested, and unheated, with blacked-out windows that let in little light. February's cold, wet weather added to the discomfort. Despite the challenges, Derriecott and her fellow WACs worked tirelessly, sorting through letters and packages, readdressing correspondence for soldiers who had transferred units, and ensuring that mail reached its intended recipient. "That took a lot of work," Derriecott remembered. "It kept you really busy, on your toes." Each day brought new obstacles, yet the women persisted, motivated by the knowledge that their work connected soldiers with loved ones back home, lifting morale and reminding the men on the front lines that they were remembered. Through discipline, determination, and teamwork, Derriecott and the women of the 6,888th took on an essential role in the war effort, demonstrating resilience and courage under conditions that tested both their physical endurance and mental fortitude. The backdrop of war constantly intruded on daily life for Lena Derriecott and the women of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion. Since July 1944, V-1 buzz bombs and V-2 rockets had rained down on England, leaving destruction in their wake. Although the British had devised an imperfect defense using anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons, and fighter planes to intercept most of the V-1 pilotless planes, they were powerless against the V-2 ballistic rockets. "You could hear the German buzz bombs coming over," Derriecott recalled, describing the pulsing, buzzing engines of the V-1 that abruptly fell silent just before the deadly impact. "You could hear in the distance when one had hit." Beyond the immediate threat of these flying explosives, the women were constantly aware of Allied aircraft in the sky. Fleets of bombers and fighter planes patrolled overhead, and despite Allied air supremacy, Derriecott explained, it was frightening because we didn't know if they were ours or theirs, a constant reminder of the perils of a war-torn sky. Amid the chaos, the women also connected with the resilient citizens of Birmingham, whose city had endured relentless bombings by the German Luftwaffe for years before the V-1 attacks began. Many locals had grown accustomed to blackout drills and hurriedly taking shelter during air raids. They opened up their homes to us, Derriecott said, recalling the generosity of a population surviving on meager rations. With limited supplies, the citizens subsisted on meals of mushrooms and toast, or cabbage with a small portion of fish on thick bread. Derriecott and her fellow WACs, having access to PX provisions, often shared food with the locals, offering relief and comfort amid the ongoing hardships. The war's toll was further felt with personal sorrow when President Franklin Roosevelt passed away on April 12, 1945. Derriecott expressed the deep sadness felt by many, noting, "I loved Roosevelt. I just remember being very sad." Yet the grief quickly transformed into joy just weeks later, on May 8, 1945, when Germany formally surrendered to the Allies in Reims, France VE Day. The streets of Birmingham erupted in celebration as the WACs and citizens alike cheered, danced, and honked horns in delight. Derriecott remembered, "We had a big celebration. Everyone was happy." Around the same time, the 6,888th completed its monumental mission in Birmingham, achieving in 3 months what had been slated for 6. Despite harsh winter conditions, they reduced mountains of undelivered mail, repackaged parcels, redirected letters, and returned dead mail to its source. Over 90 days, the women processed nearly 18 million parcels, sorting an average of 5.85 million per month. Daily, each shift handled 65,000 parcels, a staggering 195,000 collectively, far exceeding the 624,000 parcels processed by a previous Army postal unit in an entire month. This extraordinary feat demonstrated that, when given the opportunity, African American women could serve with unmatched efficiency and dedication in the war effort. However, the mission was far from over. Even after VE Day, American soldiers remained in Europe, still relying on vital correspondence from home. On May 20th, the 6,888th sailed across the English Channel to Le Havre, France, heading for the city of Rouen. Here, the women encountered the devastating consequences of modern warfare firsthand. Everything was just bombed to rubble, and all the beautiful cathedrals were in heaps, Derriecott recalled. Undeterred, the battalion established operations in a French monastery, where Derriecott found a more permanent and organized setup than in Birmingham. She worked diligently pitching mail, but also contributed to the battalion's morale and community by assisting in the poster unit, creating drawings and decorations to brighten the space. Through perseverance, resilience, and skill, Derriecott and the women of the 6,888th continued to ensure that the vital link between soldiers and their families remained unbroken, even amid the ruins of war. French civilians frequently visited the 6888th's camp, often hungry and in search of food, and the women did what they could to help. Derriecott fondly recalled one such encounter when a French woman invited her to a local cafe, where she was introduced to French bread. "I loved their bread," she admitted. "It was so different." Amid the everyday struggles of post-war France, Derriecott also witnessed the harsh realities of occupation and reprisal, seeing French women whose heads had been shaved bald for collaborating with German soldiers. "They got that from sleeping with Germans," she explained, a stark reminder of the human cost and social consequences of war. Tragedy struck the battalion on July 8, when 2 U.S. Army 2.5-ton trucks arrived to transport 3 WAC Sergeant Dolores Brown and PFCs Mary J. Barlow and Mary H. Bankston on an urgent assignment. The trucks wound along a narrow mountainous road when a mudslide washed out a section, causing the vehicles to roll down a steep slope into the forest below. "It was a horrible accident," Derriecott recalled. Sadly, these 3 women became the 6888th's only casualties, and they were laid to rest in the American cemetery in Normandy, where they remain today, honored for their service and sacrifice. Derriecott herself did not remain in France long. With the war over and many American soldiers idle, the U.S. military offered educational opportunities, including college credit courses, to service members. Having won several awards for her artistic skills while in Rouen, Derriecott entered a lottery for design school, was selected, and traveled to Leicester, England, to continue her education. While she enjoyed her design classes, the experience was not without challenges. Derriecott and her roommate Clara, another 6,888th veteran, were the only black residents in town, and their landlady proved coarse and petty, coveting the Americans' pay and rations, especially bacon. Nevertheless, Derriecott persisted in her studies, witnessing historic events such as the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Japan's subsequent surrender, marking the end of World War II in the Pacific. Eventually, the 6,888th returned to the United States in March 1948, and Derriecott made her own journey home from France. At Camp Lucky Strike, she was temporarily grouped with white WACs, which initially made her feel isolated, though she was welcomed by the women. They then boarded a converted luxury liner bound for the United States. "I think I was the only black person on the whole ship," Derriecott remembered, but the voyage itself was uneventful, with clear skies and calm waters. Upon docking in New York Harbor, she took a train to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where her mother, aunt, and a few friends greeted her. The reunion was emotional. "We just hugged and cried and laughed," Derriecott said. When her mother asked what she wanted most, she replied simply, "I just want some of your home cooking." Today, Derriecott enjoys her retired life in Las Vegas, Nevada. At 95 years old in 2018, she still attends church every Sunday with her friend Barbara Lewis and continues to cook for herself. Reflecting on her experiences during World War II, she takes pride in her service and the lessons it taught her. "It broadened my life," she said. "I learned a lot about people and the world." Even nearly 75 years later, memories of the war sometimes resurface in her dreams. She drifts back to her 6,888th friends, the people she met in England and France, and most vividly, the ship ride home, carrying the knowledge that she served her country with distinction and accomplished her mission. Private First Class Rome C. Johnson also shared in this remarkable journey as a member of the 6,888th, highlighting the collective resilience and dedication of the battalion.